अधिगम्य महेश्वरात् कृत्स्नं व्याकरणं प्रोक्तं तस्मै पाणिने नमः। वाक्यकारं वररुचिं भाष्यकारं पतञ्जलिं पाणिनिं सूत्रकारं च प्रणतोऽस्मि मुनित्रयं नत्वा सरस्वतीं देवीं शुद्धां पुण्यं गुरुं पाणिनीयप्रवेशाय लघुसिद्धान्तकौमुदीम्। पूर्वस्मिन् वर्गे तुल्यास्य प्रयत्नं सवर्णम् इति सूत्रस्य अध्ययनं प्रारब्धम्। किञ्चित् प्रारम्भिकः विषयः अस्माभिः दृष्टः. So let's quickly summarize what we completed in the previous class. तत्र तुल्यास्य प्रयत्नं सवर्णम् इत्यत्र सवर्णम् इति संज्ञा विधीयते, अतः सवर्णम् इति विधेयं, तुल्यास्य प्रयत्नम् इति उद्देश्यम्, आस्य आस्ये स्थितम् आस्यम्. So आस्य word has been overloaded. आस्य इत्युक्ते मुखम्, आस्ये यत्किमपि स्थितम्, आस्ये यत्किमपि विद्यते, तत्र आस्य प्लस यत्, eventually it all again gives आस्य. यस्येति च इति अकारस्य लोपः, हलोयमाम्यमि लोपः इति यकारस्य लोपः, आस्य मुखस्थितं किम् उच्चारणस्थानम् इति तस्य अर्थः. प्रयत्नम् इत्यस्य विषये अस्माभिः दृष्टं वा इति न स्मर्यते, परन्तु प्रकृष्टः यत्नः, यत्न इस् एफर्ट्, प्रकृष्टः यत्नः प्रयत्नः, यत् इत्यस्मात् धातोः नङ् इति प्रत्यये कृते यत्न इति शब्दः सिद्ध्यति. ऐ शोड् द सूत्र यजयाज यतविच्छ प्रत्यरक्षो नङ्. तत्र कीदृशः प्रयत्नः? सो वी हैव टू टाइप्स ऑफ प्रयत्नास्, आभ्यन्तर प्रयत्न and बाह्य प्रयत्न. बाह्य प्रयत्न are outside the mukha. Outside the mukha does not mean in the open air, even below the mukha, but the whatever region you call it mukha, it is below that, where the vocal cords are present, that the effort concentrated at that region is bahya prayatna. Abhyantara prayatna is inside the mukha. So asya iti asti, atah mukhasthitah prayatnah eva tatra svikriyate, अतः आभ्यंतर प्रयत्नः. सो आभ्यंतर प्रयत्नः तथा च मुखस्थितम् उच्चारणस्थानं ययोः द्वयोः वर्णयोः एतौ समानौ स्तः, तयोः अत्र अनेन सूत्रेण सवर्णम् इति संज्ञा दीयते इति प्रारम्भिकः विषयः अस्माभिः ज्ञातः. तदनन्तरम् उच्चारणस्थानानां विषये किञ्चित् अस्माभिः चिन्तनं कृतं. सो 5 मोस्ट इम्पोर्टेंट उच्चारणस्थानाः स्टार्टिंग फ्रॉम द ओष्ठौ, देन दन्ताः, then technically there is murdha, then we have talu, and then we have kantha. So you have kantha, which is all the way at the back. In English we call it as velar. Immediately next to it is talu. After that there is murdha, which is retroflex. After that there is dantaha, and after that there is oshtau. In your Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi class, there was one extra knowledge kind of session. The YouTube link is presented over here. So this comparison was also done by Soumyaji over there, that in general, the way we speak ch, ch, j, j, today, it looks like the tongue touches some portion behind the teeth. So according to that logic, the talu will come next to the teeth and then there will be murdha. However, scientifically, as per the Shiksha Shastra, the Uchcharana Sthanam called talu is behind the murdha. So you have first, there is a, so if you start from the mouth, you have first the Oshtau, then you have Dantaha, then you have murdha, then you have talu, and finally you have kantha. So the first figure actually depicts the way we pronounce ch, ch, j, j, today. The correct pronunciation of ch, ch, j, j will involve usage of the correct talu rather than the apparent talu. What is the correct talu? It is some place after the murdha and before the kantha. In order to make sure that we can actually pronounce ch, ch, j, j using that real talu, a simple experiment that you can do is hold the tongue with your hand, the tip of the tongue with your two fingers, and pronounce ch, ch, j, j. It is extremely easy to pronounce ch, ch, j, j even when you hold the tip of your tongue. Let me try it out. See this. Ch, ch, j, j. Slightly different sound comes, but it is very easy. On the other hand, t, th, d, d, n or t, th, d, th, n or p, p, b, b, m are not possible to be pronounced when you hold the tip of your tongue. This proves that it is possible to pronounce ch, ch, j, j where the back of the tongue touches a part called talu as written in the second figure. Whether we pronounce it today correctly or not is a completely different question. Adya yadrisham uchcharanam bhavati. Tatra, the tongue touches the back of the teeth, and that is what ch gets pronounced. I mean, most of us pronounce in that way, but it is obviously possible to pronounce it in the right way, where the tongue is expected to touch in an area between the murdha and the kantha. So anena prakarena atra apparent position of talu, or whatever position we see today, versus the position of the talu which is given by the shastras. So as per the sutras, as per the shikshas and so on, शास्त्रोक्त रूपेण तालुनः स्थानं मूर्धा तथा कण्ठः इत्येतयोः मध्ये भवति. इदानीम् अग्रे गच्छामः. अतः तत्र एतेषां सर्वेषाम् उच्चारणस्थानानाम् आधारेण के वर्णाः उच्चार्यन्ते तस्मिन् विषये सिद्धान्तकौमुद्यां, प्रायेण लघुसिद्धान्तकौमुद्यामपि अस्ति, एकादश वाक्यानि, एकादश कारिकाः, सूत्राणि उक्तानि सन्ति. अकुह विसर्जनीयानां कण्ठः, इचुयशानां तालु. Everybody knows all these by heart. If not, they should be memorized for sure. अकुह विसर्जनीयानां कण्ठः, इचुयशानां तालु, ऋटुरसाणां मूर्धा, लुतुलसानां दन्ताः, उपुपद्मानीयानाम् ओष्ठौ. So these are the 5 most important. यमगणनानां नासिकाच्च, नासिका इति मुखस्थितम् उच्चारणस्थानं नास्ति, अतः तस्य अत्र चिन्तनं न क्रियते. चकारः तत्र संस्थाप्यते. चकारेण किं स्पष्टीभवति? Individual uchcharanasthanas present in the mouth. In addition to that, there is nasika. These are 6 individual uchcharanasthanas, and then you have a bunch of combinations. So edauto kanthatalu. So I have a diagram, I think. Look at this. I'll explain this complete diagram properly in a minute. But before that, we have edaito kanthatalu. So A and I are combined efforts of kantha and talu. Odauto kanthostham. So kantha and oshtha, O and Au are the combined efforts. Vakarasya dantostham. So danta and oshtha are the combined efforts for the V. Jivhamuliyasya jivhamulam nasika anuswarasya. These are the total of 11 different sutras that involve the uchcharana sthanas. Now we come to the abhyantara prayatna. The abhyantara prayatna is defined by the fact, now that you have uchcharana sthana fixed, abhyantara prayatna is defined as the interaction of tongue with the corresponding uchcharana sthana. So once the uchcharana sthana gets fixed, that's step number 1. The next step is how the tongue interacts with the uchcharana sthana. By interaction, we mean what is the distance between the tongue, any area of the tongue or the nearest area of the tongue, and the corresponding uchcharana sthana. So then we have sprishta, which means that the tongue touches the organ clearly. That's why sprisha ityasmat sprishta iti shabdah siddhyati. So the tongue touches the organ clearly. So we have all the sprishta letters ta varga, pa varga, ka varga, cha varga, ta varga. You can actually practice this. So for example, when we say ta, tha, da, dha, na, you can actually see the tongue touching the teeth, right? Or others, it's slightly difficult, but ta, tha, da, dha, na is very clear. The tongue touches the murdha. Ta, tha, da, dha, na is also clear. Pa, pha, ba, bha, ma, apparently, but because oshtha touch each other, it's hard to actually look where the tongue is. The other two are slightly difficult to understand. Sure, again, there is a confusion on the way we pronounce versus the real pronunciation. So, ta and ta is very easy to see that tongue actually touches the teeth and the tongue actually touches the murdha. The second category is tongue touches the organs intermittently or slightly. So that we call ishat. Ishat ityukte kinchit. Kinchit sprishtam. So a typical way to see this is ra. When you say ra, the tongue vibrates. Try pronouncing it. If it vibrates and it touches, goes back, touches, goes back, touches, goes back. Ra. Okay. So it's basically intermittent touching. You can see that in case of la, ya, wa, but it will not be obvious. It's obvious in case of ra. The tongue touches and goes back. The next is there is a slight gap. So tongue will never touch, but there is a minor gap between the tongue and the corresponding organ. So then we call it Ishad Vivruta. Vivruta is opening. Ishad is a little bit. So there is a little bit opening present over there. Opening in the sense the distance between the organ of pronunciation and the tongue. So we say Ishad Vivruta. can be very easily seen by the s, s or sh. Sh is the simplest way you can see it. Sh, you see the murdha being used, but you don't see the tongue touching the murdha. Sh, you can actually see the tongue going near the murdha but not touching it. Sh is hard because again there is a confusion of talu. S is very easy to see because you can see the tongue going towards the teeth. You can pronounce it on your own while I am teaching, and it will be very easy to understand. Sir, the tongue is going to the teeth but not touching the teeth. The simplest to see is sh, where tongue goes to the murdha but it doesn't touch the murdha. Minor gap is there. We call it ishad vivrta. If the tongue is at a distance, so the gap is more, but the tongue is still pointed towards the organ, we call it vivruta. So vivruta means it's open. So see, this is a gradation. So this is basically in the order of distance between the tongue and the organ. You say zero distance, intermittent zero distance, very little distance, open. So slightly more distance. So tongue is at a distance, but it still points to the organ. All the swaras fall in this category. We call it vivruta, open. Open in the sense there is a significant distance between the tongue and the organ of pronunciation, but still the tongue points to the organ. Finally, the tongue is completely covered, which means it is not even pointing. So there is no relation or no use of tongue in that particular pronunciation. The only letter that can be pronounced is a. In this way, the abhyantara prayatnas of a and a are different. That is the reason why their pronunciation is heard differently. E and E, it's an elongated E that becomes E. U and U, an elongated U becomes U. But an elongated A does not become an A. Howsoever you elongate, it will not become an A. The fundamental reason is because their abhyantara prayatnas are different. So, elongation of one cannot result into another. And A is the only pair of savarnas where the abhyantara prayatnas are different, and then we have sutram at the end of Ashtadhyayi. We all know the story. I'll also explain it in a while. So ityasya samvruta prayatnah, a ityasya vivrutah prayatnah, sarvesham swaranam vivruta prayatnah. Ishad vivruta is of the ushmanas. Sa, sh, sh, and h is the ishad vivruta. Antasthanam ishad sprishta, and sarvanam vargiya vyanjananam sprishta iti prayatna. So this is the table that captures the abhyantara prayatnas and the ucharana sthanas together. And then how does Panini define the savarna? Very beautiful sutram actually. Tulyasya prayatnam savarnam. What he says is that you fix the ucharana sthana, let's say talu. You fix the position of the tongue. You decide whether you want your tongue to touch the organ or a little gap or more gap or even more gap or completely away. Once the ucharana sthana and the tongue is fixed, the mouth gets clamped in a certain method. You can't move the tongue because the tongue is fixed and the organ of pronunciation is also now fixed. With that fixed position of mouth, whatever sounds can come out are the savarnas. All the sounds that can come out using a fixed structure of mouth are called savarnas. So when you say, I want to use murdha and I want to make sure that the tongue touches the organ clearly, keep the tongue on the murdha and try pronouncing whatever sounds you want. You can only pronounce t, th, d, dh, and n. So then they are savarnas of each other. In the same way, if you want to have the organ of pronunciation as oshtha, and if you want to say, I want to keep the tongue at a distance, but I want to point to the organ, not touching, not close by, not nearby, but at a distance, the only letters that you can pronounce are U and U. They are savarnas of each other. So Tulyasya Prayatnam Savarnam, very beautifully designed sutra with a significant amount of insight. The sutra simply says this, that clamp your mouth in a certain way, all the sounds that can come out are savarnas. So the definition of savarna is closely linked with the way of pronunciation. Any questions so far? I'm sure this must be all known to you. I'm still just recording in case somebody has forgotten anything.
I have something. to say,
वदतु
मतेन तु चत्वारः एव अभ्यन्तरप्रयत्नाः इति अस्ति खलु.
I'll come to that.
ईषद्विवृत्त comes in भाष्यं पतञ्जलि मुनिना उक्तं.
Correct.
So
correct.
Panini Siksha says only चत्वारः
स्वराणाम्
स्वराणां चैव विवृत्तं
स्वराणाम्
करणं.
ऊष्मणां च विवृत इति प्रयत्नः इति तत्र पाणिनिना उक्तमस्ति. So according to Panini, there are only 4 abhyantara prayatnas. You have sprushta, you have ishat sprushta, you have vivruta, and you have samruta. So let's go to tulyasya prayatnam savarnam sutram. Sprushtam prayatnam sparshanam. So sparshas have the sprushta prayatnas. Ishat sprushtam antasthanam. So ya va ra la ityetesham ishat sprushtah. No confusion so far. Then we have vivrutam swaranam ushmanam cha. So according to one stream of thoughts, which is also given in Siddhanta Kaumudi, which is also given by Panini, is that these 2 rows, third and fourth, he does not distinguish between minor gap versus major gap. So he says there is some gap. So if there is a gap, but still the tongue is pointed towards the organ, we say it is vivruta. So he does not classify it as ishad vivruta, and therefore according to him, sa and ru are in the same square. There is dash. So u and u are in the same square. H and a are in the same square. Sh, e are in the same square, and sh, ru are in the same square. So these 2 rows get merged together according to Panini, also according to Bhattoji Dikshita, and they combine the 2 efforts of pronunciation, Ishad Vivruta and Vivruta. So that is what is written over here. Vivrutam Ushmanam Swaranam Cha, and then Rasvasya Avargasya Prayoge Samrutam Prakriya Dashayam Vivrutam. Everybody knows this. So Patanjali Munina Mahabhashye Abhyantara Prayatnaha Bhinna Prakarena Uktaha Santi. He treats the Abhyantara Prayatna of Sha, Sha, Saha as Ishad Vivruta. So that actually creates 5 different Abhyantara Prayatnas, which I think Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi teaches, right? So Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi considers 5 Abhyantara Prayatnas, where Ishad Vivruta has been characterized as a separate Abhyantara Prayatna. Even further, I and Au, according to the Bhashya, is a 6th Abhyantara Prayatna, which is separate. Vivruta Taraha iti kashana prayatnaha tatra pathitah asti. According to the Mahabhashya, A and I, they do not have the same Abhyantara Prayatna called Vivruta. Similarly, O and Au do not have the same Abhyantara Prayatna called Vivruta. I has a different Prayatna called Vivruta Tara. Au also has a different Prayatna called Vivruta Tara. This is actually good because A and I are no more Savarnas anyway. If the Prayatna is different, they won't be Savarnas. So this particular current model requires A and I to be Savarnas, and then we have a separate Siddhanta. Ekara tatha aikarayoho maheshwara sutreshu pruthak granam kritam asti ataha tayoho savarnim nishidyate. So why are A and I not Savarnas? According to Patanjali, they are not Savarnas because their Abhyantara Prayatnas are themselves different. Abhyantara Prayatna of A is Vivruta, Abhyantara Prayatna of I is Vivruta Tara. In the same way, for O and O, it is Vivruta and Vivruta Tara. But we can keep that aside. For now, let's focus on what is there in Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi specifically. So these charts will differ based on the grantha that you will study. Because we are focusing on Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi, this is a chart according to that book. So Atra Varnanam Abhyantara Prayatnaha Panchadha Santi iti uchyate. When you take the Panini's approach, or when you take Siddhanta Kaumudi's approach, where there are 4 Abhyantara Prayatnas only, Ishad Vivruta and Vivruta are being combined. So there you end up in a problem that A and H are now Savarnas of each other. Sh and Ru are now Savarnas of each other. And then how do you resolve it? Anybody knows? You understand the problem in Panini's system, right?
Na jhalau.
Na jhalau. Does everybody know this? What is na jhalau? No. Okay, look at this. Panini specifies tulyasya prayatnam savarnam. Understand this. Now, from Panini's point of view, what is happening? From Panini's point of view, there are only 4 abhyantara prayatnas. There is a sprushta for the sparshas. There is ishat sprushta for the antasthas. There is vivruta for the swaras and the ushmanas. And samruta is for rasva akaraha kevalam prayoge tasya samrutatvam asti prakriya dashayam tu vivrutatvam. So then sh, if you consider sh and e, then shakarasya uchcharanasthanam talu, ikarasya uchcharanasthanam talu. Shakarasya abhyantara prayatnah vivrutaha, ikarasya abhyantara prayatnah vivrutaha. Tulyasa prayatnam savarnam ityanena tayoho savarna samnya bhavati. So then that's a problem because E and Sh are not Savarna. Therefore, Panini designs an immediate next sutra. So he designs Tulyasa Prayatnam Savarnam. And what is the immediate next sutra? Najhalau. He says, Na ach halau. Ach and hal are not savarnas of each other. This is a nishedha sutram. So najhalau iti sutrena swaraha tatha vyanjanani parasparanam savarnani na bhavanti. So a swara and a vyanjana cannot become the savarna even when we have the previous utsarga telling that they are savarnas. So this is a Savarna Samnya Nisheda Sutram, and this Sutram tells that Swaras and Vyanjananis are not the Savarnas of each other. If you agree to the bigger classification of Ishad Vivruta and Vivruta being separate rows, then Najhalau Sutram is not useful. So Patanjali does exactly this thing. He says you have 5 different prayatnas and Najhalau is a useless sutram. So Najhalau sutra se pratyakhanam. Mahabhashye Najhalau sutra se pratyakhanam. Pratyakhanam is rejection. So Mahabhashye Bhashyakarena Swaranam Abhyantara Prayatna Vivrutaha Ushmananam Abhyantara Prayatna Ishad Vivruta iti uktah asti. Asyam sthitau Swaravyঞ্জনयोः सावर्ण्यं तादृशमेव निवार्यते. Because the Abhyantara Prayatnas are different, there is no question of Savarnya. अतः Najhalau इति सूत्रस्य आवश्यकता अपि नास्ति. अतः अस्य सूत्रस्य व्याख्याने कैयट is the commentator on the Mahabhashya. कैयट also explains सूत्र प्रत्याख्यान साधारण मुक्तम. So this sutra has been rejected by the Bhashyakara in a certain frame of reference where you have 5 different Abhyantara Prayatnas. Panini does not distinguish between small gap versus large gap. Therefore, he has only 4 categories. So then he has to design another sutram called Najhalu. There is even a beautiful story in the sense lots of interesting logical aspects are associated with Najhalu. One full lecture can be taken to explain those various intricacies. But at some other time, it's part of Siddhanta Kaumudi discussion. I don't want to go in unnecessarily details. I have written an article on that. If people are interested, they are free to read. So asmin vishaye asmin lekhe vistarena charcha krita asti. Those who are interested can look at this article. The gist of the article is that Najhalau Sutram can get rid of the savarnyam between Raswa Ikara and Shakara, but it cannot get rid of savarnyam between Dirgha Ikara and Shakara. Similarly, Najhalau Sutram can get rid of the savarnyam between Rukara and Shakara, but it cannot get rid of savarnyam between Dirgha Rukara and Shakara. Same thing for A and A. Najhalau Sutram can get rid of savarnyam between A and H, but it cannot get rid of savarnyam between A and H. Okay, so then you have to do an extra prashlesha na a ach jhalau. I think some of you who have studied Siddhanta Kaumudi or even some part of Kashika might be aware of this. So all this is extremely advanced for your level. Najhalau Sutram, first of all, is not there in Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi. It's not taught in Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi. But if anybody wants, all that has been explained in this particular article. I can just show it for a minute. So Paniniyamatena akara hakaro ikara shakaro rukara shakaro savarno staha. Dirgha e and sh, a and h, dirgha ru and sh. And then it has been explained in significant detail how to refute that and so on. Okay, those of you who are interested can take a look at this article. So let's read a little bit of commentary. As I mentioned, the mouth part decides the sthana. The distance between the mouth part and tongue decides the prayatna. So you can imagine this as an x-axis versus y-axis. The sthana is on the x-axis, the prayatna is on the y-axis. Once you fix a value on x-axis and a value on y-axis, a corresponding coordinates gets fixed. Anything that can be pronounced using that coordinate is the savarna. So fix the mouth part and the distance between the mouth part and the tongue. Once the mouth gets clamped in that position, all the letters that can be pronounced are savarnas of each other. Nagesha in Tulyasa Prayatna Savarnam explains this. Asyantargata तत्तत्स्थानेषु जिह्वाग्रादीनां वर्णाभिव्यक्तिजनकस्पर्श ईषत्स्पर्श दुरावस्थान समीपावस्थान रूप आभ्यंतर कार्यकारी प्रयत्न विशेषाः एतैः पदैः उच्यन्ते. कः अर्थः? आस्य अंतर्गत, inside the mouth. Asya is mouth, antargata inside the mouth. Tat sthaneshu, various sthanas are there. What happens to these sthanas? Are they able to pronounce the letters themselves? No. It is the interaction of the tongue, some part of the tongue, and the corresponding organ. So tongue is very crucial in the pronunciation. So tat sthaneshu, in those corresponding ucharana sthanas, jivhagradinam, agra and others. So maybe the beginning of the tongue, the middle of the tongue, the end of the tongue, whichever part of the tongue is closer to that organ of pronunciation, that part of the tongue will be used. Jivhagradinam varnabhivyakti janakaha. So that particular effort which will result in the creation of the letter. Varna abhivyakti, expression. Varnabhivyakti janakaha. What kind of effort? It depends on the distance. So he says sparsha, touches. Ishat sparsha, intermittently touches. Duravasthana, goes a little bit away. Samipavasthana is closer. So same way, looking at the gap between the tongue and the corresponding organ of pronunciation. So Duravasthana, Samivasthana Rupa, these kind of various ways of using the tongue in association with the organ of pronunciation. Abhyantara कार्यकारी प्रयत्न विशेषाः एतैः पदैः इत्युक्ते स्पर्श, ईश स्पर्श, विवृत एंड सो ऑन, एतैः पदैः उच्यन्ते. तेषां च आस्य वृत्तित्वम् आस्यांतर्गत तत् तत् स्थानेषु, टाइपिंग मिस्टेक, तेषां च आस्य वृत्तित्वम् आस्यांतर्गत तत् तत् स्थानेषु वायुसंयोग जननत्वेन. So how is their interaction happening with the mouth part? It's basically the air which causes the vibration or which passes between whatever gap is being made over there. So vayu sanyoga jananatvena tatta sthaneshu varnabhivyaktihi bhavati iti asya sarvasya ashayah. So Nagesha explains exactly this particular part, that the Abhyantara Prayatnas are being discussed or are being designed using a two-dimensional characteristics. Thanas on one line, Abhyantara Prayatnas on another line. This together decides the concept of Savarnas. Let's read the commentary. So Tulyasya Prayatnam Savarnam. So Talvadisthanam Abhyantara Prayatnascha etadvayam yasyena tulyam tadmithas savarna samnyam syat इति लघु सिद्धांत कौमुद्यां तत्र सुधा टीकायां आस्ये इत्युक्ते मुखे भवं तद आस्यं, ताल्वादिस्थानं शरीरावयवाद्यत इति तत्र भवः इत्यस्मिन् अर्थे यत् प्रत्ययः आस्ये भवः आस्यः. प्रकृष्टः यत्नः प्रयत्नः, आस्यं च प्रयत्नश्च, प्रयत्न is in the pullinga, asya is in the napumsakalinga. Asyam cha prayatnascha asya prayatnau. The word prayatna has been explained as prayatanam prayatnaha. So prayatana word is in the napumsakalinga. Yat iti dhatuhu, tasmat lut iti pratyayah. Lekhana, pathana, hasana. In the same way you have yatana. So very similar looking words. Prayatana is napumsakalinga. In prayatna there is a nang pratyaya, same dhatu but pratyaya is different. It is a pullinga word. So prayatna is pullinga, prayatanam is napumsakalinga. So asyam cha prayatnascha asya prayatnau, tulyau asya prayatnau yasya varna jalasya, group of letters, तत् तुल्यास्य प्रयत्नं परस्परं सवर्णसंज्ञं स्यात् इति भावः. अतः किमुच्यते? तालवादिस्थानम् अभ्यन्तर प्रयत्नम् एंड सो ऑन. मिथः इत्युक्ते परस्परम् इत्यर्थः. कस्य किं स्थानम् इति आकांक्षायां तद् व्यवस्थापकानि पाणिन्यादि शिक्षावचनानि अर्थतः संगृह्णाति. So in Paniniya Shiksha, these particular Uchcharasthanas are given in a different way. They are being enumerated in a different manner by Bhattoji Dikshita, copied by Varadaraja. So Paninyadi Shikshavachanani Arthataha Sangranhati Akuha Ityadina. So you have akuha visarjaniyanam kanthaha, ichuyashanam talu, ruturashanam murdha, lutulasanam dantaha, upupadmaniyanam oshtau, yamagananam nasika cha. These are individual organs of pronunciation. Then you have the combined efforts. Edaito kanthatalu, odauto kanthostam, vakarasya dantoshtam. And then you have appendix or some last ones. Jivhamuliyasya jivhamulam nasika anuswarasya. So that is being explained now. A ityanena ashtadasha bhedaha griyante. So when you have akuha visarjaniyanam kantha, it's not just a single a. Rasva dirgha pluta multiplied by udatta anudatta swarita multiplied by anunasika ananunasika. So you have all the 18. A iti ashtadasha bhedaha griyante. Ku iti kadi panchakatmakah kavargah. So ukaरेण तत्र सवर्णग्रहणं भवति. So aku iti tatra kakha gaghanga ityetesham ascha kuscha hascha visarjaniyah. So akuha visarjaniyah. These are not Panini's sutras. These are simply explanations given in the commentaries. They are not Panini's sutras. So akuha visarjaniyah iti vigrahaha. Visarjaniya shabdah api visarga paryayah. Visarjaniya and visarga are same. Panini uses the word visarjaniya. Panini does not use the word visarga. So kharavasanayoh visarjaniyah iti Panininapi visarjaniya shabda prayukta asti. So when it comes to paryaya vachaka words, we don't talk about the laghutva and alpaksharatva and so on. Is basically style of somebody. I mean, one can always say that why use the word visarjaniya? Visarjaniya ityasya sthane visargaha iti bhavet. Anyatarasya ityasya sthane va iti bhavet. Vibhasha ityasya sthane va iti bhavet. So you do not discuss these kind of things. पर्यायवाचक शब्देषु गौरव लाघव चर्चा न द्रियते इति सिद्धान्तः अस्ति. अतः तत्र समानार्थक शब्दानां विषये लाघवस्य चिन्तनं न क्रियते. सो विसर्जनीय शब्दः अपि विसर्गपर्यायः. इचुयशानां तालु. सो इ इति अष्टादश भेदाः, चु इति च वर्गः, ईश्च चूश्च शश्च इति विग्रहः. ऋटुरश. So now you should be able to construct these sentences on your own. रु इति अष्टादश भेदाः, टु इति वर्गः, आ. रु इत्यस्य प्रथमैकवचनम् आ इति भवति. पितृ इत्यस्य पिता इति भवति. मातृ इत्यस्य माता इति भवति. रु इत्यस्य आ इति भवति. आच टुश्च रश्च शश्च. रु टु र श. आच टुश्च रश्च शश्च इति विग्रहः. रु शब्दस्य आ इति प्रथमैकवचनान्तं धाता इति वत्. All he has explained on his own very clearly. लुतुलसानां दन्तः. लु इत्यस्य द्वादश भेदाः, तु इति त वर्गः. लु इत्यस्य प्रथमैकवचनम् अपि आ इत्येव भवति. आच तुश्च लश्च सश्च इति विग्रहः. सो लु शब्दस्य अपि आ इत्येव प्रथमैकवचनान्तत्वम्. आ अलौ अलः. So a arau araha is for ru, a alau alaha is for lu. So atra shabda paठ्ये अपि अस्ति lu इत्यस्य a alau alaha इति भवति. Similarly a arau araha. So a arau araha is for ru and a alau alaha is for lu. So a alau alaha iti. Then he says in lutulasanam dantaha we have danta. See how beautifully he has thought through small things. दंत शब्देन दंत मूल प्रदेशः विवक्षितः. Not the actual teeth, but the place where the teeth originate or are touching the body. किमर्थम? अन्यथा भग्नदन्तस्य तद उच्चारण अनुपपत्तेः. Somebody who does not have a teeth can still pronounce ta, tha, da, dha, na. Where will the tongue touch? The tongue will touch the place where the teeth are expected to be present. So that part of the mouth where the teeth originate, there the tongue will touch and that person can still pronounce ta, tha, da, dha, na. So danta shabdena dantaha iti na swikriyate, api danta moola pradeshaha swikriyate. किमर्थम? भग्नः दन्तः यस्य सः. दन्ताः एव न सन्ति तादृशः मनुष्यः तथ दधन इत्यस्य उच्चारणं कर्तुं शक्नोति वा? अवश्यं शक्नोति. तादृशेन स्पष्टरूपेण प्रायेण न शक्नुयात्, परन्तु शक्नोति. अतः तत्र भग्नदन्तस्य तद् उच्चारण अनुपपत्तेः. अनुपपत्त is not possibility of the pronunciation. Then he says upupadmaniyanam oshtau. द्विवचनम् अस्ति, only two oshthas. So u iti ashtadasha भेदाः, पु इति प वर्गः, उश्च पुश्च उपध्मानीयश्च उश्च पुश्च उपध्मानीयश्च इति विग्रहः उपध्मानीय शब्दस्य व्याख्यानम् अनुपदमेव इन अ शॉर्ट व्हाइल अनुपदमेव मूले स्पष्टं भविष्यति मूले इत्युक्ते मूलव्याख्याने सो मूलव्याख्याने उपध्मानीय इति शब्दस्य विवरणम् अग्रे दास्यते इत्युक्ते अत्र उपोपध्मानीयानाम् ओष्ठौ इत्यत्र उपध्मानीय इति शब्दः अस्ति अग्रे कुत्रचित् पफ इति पफाभ्यां प्राग् अर्धविसर्गसदृशः उपध्मानीय इति अस्य शब्दस्यैव व्याख्या अस्मिन्नेव सूत्रे अनन्तरं दीयते सो दैट इज व्हाट ही एक्सप्लेन्स उपध्मानीय शब्दस्य व्याख्यानम् अनुपदमेव almost immediately within a short while मूले स्पष्टं भविष्यति so everybody knows upadmaniya the ardha visarga sadrusha kakaf patati so that sound that comes is upadmaniya so yamaganana yascha mascha ngascha nascha nascha iti vigrahah chakarena swa swa vargiya sthana samuccayah so yamaganana nasika ch why is that ch included because yakarasya talu api asti makarasya oshtau api asti nakarasya kantha api asti so along with that nasika so nyascha mascha ngascha nascha nascha iti vigrahah chakarena swa swa vargiya sthana samuccayah edaitoho kanthatalu so eta and aita there is a taparakaranam over there do you really need a taparakaranam over here no किमर्थम् इति चेत् ए इत्यनेन अत्र प्लुत एकारस्य अवश्यं ग्रहणं भवति ऐ इत्यनेन प्लुत ऐकारस्य अवश्यं ग्रहणं भवति अतः अत्र एदैतो एत् ऐत् एदैतो इत्यत्र तपरकरणम् असन्देहार्थम् असन्देह इत्युक्ते टु सेपरेट आउट ए एंड ऐ सो सिमिलरली ओत् च औत् च सो ओच्च औच्च औदौतो तप्रकरणं पूर्ववद् असन्देहार्थम् जिह्वामूलीयस्य जिह्वामूलम् he explains this ख ख इति कखाभ्यां प्राग् अर्धविसर्गसदृशः जिह्वामूलीयः इति अग्रे मूले एव उक्तम् अनुस्वारस्य इत्युक्ते उच्चारणस्थानम् इति शेषः अनुस्वारस्य नासिकास्थानम् अस्ति इति भावः अनेन प्रकारेण अत्र नासिका अनुस्वारस्य च इति यावत् पर्यन्तं यत् किमपि मूले दत्तमस्ति तस्य विवरणम् उक्तम्
महोदय एकः प्रश्नः अस्ति
उच्यताम् उच्यताम्
सो एकार तत्र दीर्घः अस्ति प्लुत अपि अस्ति खलु सो देयर आर 12 वर्जन्स ऑफ एकारः
करेक्ट
सिमिलरली ऐकार ओकार औकारः सो व्हाई व्हेन यू से एत when you do the tapara tatkalasya then you are eliminating the pluta right so why
Correct.
is it the pluta eliminated here
it's not eliminated so that's what we are saying when we say edaito kanthatalu we actually want the a to include the pluta so the ta over there is not for taparakaranam at all have you do you know the concept of taparakaranam taparakaranam is a process where a ta is added for getting rid of savarnas taparastakalasya इत्यनेन तकारः यदि प्रयुज्यते तत्र सवर्णस्य तत्र ग्रहणं न भवति only the तत्कालस्य एव ग्रहणं भवति the point to understand is that there are other places where ta gets added without having the savarna grahanam in the picture that is exactly what is discussed over here he says taparakaranam asandehartham so ta is being added towards the end but this taparakaranam is not for the savarna grahana niyama it is only for asandehartham what is asandeha if I pronounce a and I together that might be a confusion one might be tempted to do a sandhi over there or one might be forced to do a sandhi over there so in order to avoid all that kind of confusion we have taparakaranam done over there so taparakaranam asandehartham same thing for oath and out as well okay agre gacchamaha then he talks about the yatna यत्नः द्विधा आभ्यन्तरः बाह्यश्च आद्यः इत्युक्ते आभ्यन्तरप्रयत्नः पञ्चः everybody remembers this particular line it's very easily remembered Sprušteshat, sprušteshat. So you pronounce it 2 times. Sprušteshat, sprušteshat, vivruta, vivruta, samvruta, bhedat. So sprushta, ishat, sprushta, ishat, vivruta, vivruta, and samvruta. The way to remember this is sprušteshat phrase should be repeated twice. Vivruta phrase should be repeated twice. Sprušteshat, sprušteshat, vivruta, vivruta, samvruta, bhedat. Tatra sprushtam prayatanam sparshanam. ईषत् स्पृष्टमन्तस्थानाम् ईषद् विवृतमुष्मणां विवृतं स्वराणां ह्रस्वस्य अवर्णस्य प्रयोगे संवृतं प्रक्रिया दशायां तु विवृतमेव. The meaning of this sentence is that when a is pronounced naturally, you don't have a control. It will anyway be samvruta. You cannot pronounce a with a vivruta fashion in an easy, untrained manner. However, if this akara becomes samvruta, then all the savarna will break down. So in the prakriya, it is explicitly being treated as vivruta, and then at the end of ashtadhyayi, akara samvrutah vidhiyate. Anena prakarena prayoge tasya samvrutatva siddham bhavati. So this has been explained. Yatno dvidha iti yatnanam abhyantaratvam bahyatvam cha varnotpattehe prag ऊर्ध्वभावित्वम इति पाणिन्यादि शिक्षासु स्पष्टम. So bahya doesn't mean outside the mouth in the sense in the open air. That's not even possible. So he basically says bahya ityukte a certain time frame outside that or a certain location outside that. So prak ऊर्ध्वभावित्वम इति पाणिन्यादि शिक्षासु स्पष्टम. Prag iti kimartham? Before the actual varna is produced, how is the air generated? So that's prag. Urdhva bhavitvam iti kim? Upper part. So if you start from the mouth, even the upper part below the kantha, whatever are the vocal cords and all that, there the bahya prayatna will be discussed, or that is the location where the bahya prayatna is involved. So prag and urdhva bhavitvam asti iti paninyadi shikshasu spashtam. Sudhaji, you have to say something.
The very fundamental sprishtam is when the tongue is touching the part fully.
Correct.
Then how is that different from samvritam?
Samvritam is completely opposite of sprishta. Samvrita means tongue is not involved in the pronunciation. Forget about touching. The only letter that gets pronounced using samvrita is a. Try using a and see where the tongue is there. Tongue is not
Nowhere.
used. A. It's not used.
No, because some samvrita is closed, no.
It's
So
written on the
what is
slide.
closed is what
It's written on the slide.
because of
It's
the
written on the slide.
language.
Because of the language, I totally understand. Tongue is completely closed, which means it is not even pointing. Who is closed? The gap is not closed. The tongue has been closed down by you. You are not employing the tongue in any kind of pronunciation, so it has been shut down. That is closed. So samvrita doesn't mean a hole is being closed. Samvrita means the usage of the tongue is being closed. Okay, that's what is written over here. Tongue is completely covered. So covered, samvrita technically means covered. Who is covered? The tongue is covered. The tongue is covered, so it cannot even go towards the organ. So yatno dvidha iti yatnanam abhyantaratvam bahyatvam cha varnotpattehe prak ऊर्ध्व भावित्वम इति पाणिन्यादि शिक्षासु स्पष्टम. यत्न इति यत्न शब्दः प्रयत्नपरः. आद्य इत्युक्ते आभ्यन्तर प्रयत्नः. कथं पंचधा स्पृष्ट इत्यादीनां स्पृष्ट ईषत् स्पृष्ट ईषद् विवृत विवृत संवृत एषु मध्ये प्रयतनम् इत्युक्ते प्रयत्नः. स्पर्शानाम् इत्युक्ते स्पर्शवर्णानां. ते के वर्णाः इति मूले स्फुटी भविष्यन्ति. इट विल बी एक्सप्लेन्ड इन द मूल. तथापि अत्र निर्दिश्यन्ते. स्टिल आई विल टेल यू हियर. All these are sparsha. Ka varnadarabhya ma varna paryantam sparsha varnaha. So understand the difference between the words sparsha and sprushta. Sprushta is the abhyantara prayatna. Sparsha is the group of the letters. Sparshaha ke ka ityasmat arabhya ma iti paryantam ye varnaha santi. Te varnaha sparshaha. Tesham abhyantara prayatnah sprushtaha. So the name of the letter is sparsha, the abhyantar prayatna is sprushta. The name of the letter is antastha, the abhyantar prayatna is ishat sprushta. The name of the letter is ushmanaha, the abhyantara prayatna is ishat vibruta. The name of the letter is swara, the abhyantara prayatna is vibruta. Anena prakarena अत्र स्पर्श इत्युक्ते क इत्यस्मात् आरभ्य म इति पर्यन्ताः वर्णाः. सो क वर्णादारभ्य म वर्णपर्यन्तम्. अन्तस्थानाम् इति य र ल व, ऊष्मणाम् इति श श स ह, स्वराणाम् इति अ इ उ एंड सो ऑन. प्रयोगे शास्त्रीय प्रक्रियाभिः परिनिष्ठितायां रामः कृष्णः इत्यादि शब्दानां प्रयोगे क्रियमाणे एव ह्रस्वस्य अवर्णस्य संवृतत्वं प्रक्रिया इति. सो प्रयोगे ह्रस्व अकारः संवृतः अस्ति. सो शास्त्रीय प्रक्रियाम् अनुसृत्य रामः कृष्णः इति शब्दाः ये सिद्ध्यन्ति तेषाम् उच्चारणे अकारः कथं प्रयुज्यते? तत्र संवृतः प्रयुज्यते. परन्तु प्रक्रियायां शास्त्रीय कार्य प्रवृत्ति समये when you are applying the sutras, दण्ड प्लस आढक इत्यत्र कश्चन सवर्ण दीर्घः करणीयः. तत्र सवर्ण दीर्घादौ कर्तव्ये विवृतत्वमेव तेन एव संधिकार्यं निर्बाधम्. He has explained everything. I don't need to talk a single line. तेन संधिकार्यं निर्बाधम्. अकस्सवर्णे दीर्घः इत्यनेन संधिकार्यं तत्र निर्बाधं भवति. एतत् सर्वं पूर्वत्रासिद्धम् इत्यनेन ज्ञापितम् इति सिद्धान्तकौमुद्यां स्पष्टम्. पूर्वत्रासिद्धम् इत्यत्र नाज्झलौ इत्यत्रापि अकस्सवर्णे दीर्घ इत्यत्रापि भाष्ये उक्तमस्ति. So Sapada Saptadhyayi will see all the swaras as vivruta and therefore sandhi karyam nirbadham. So this is basically due to Purvatra Siddham. Now we come to the Bahya Prayatnas. Bahya Prayatna is the second category of the Prayatna. What do Bahya Prayatna indicate? Through what type of passage and through what type of mechanism does the air come out? So understand, Bahya Prayatnas are actually first. That's why he says Prag. He uses two words, Prag and Urdhvam. In Sudha Teeka, you can see this. Varnotpattehe Prag and Urdhva Bhavitvam. So unless the air is generated and it starts vibrating, the letters cannot be pronounced. So the vibration of the air, which is central to the Bahya Prayatnas, comes before the Uchcharana. So it is Prag. And Urdhva, if you look at this particular ordering, Abhyantara Prayatnas are earlier. Above that, inside of that are the Bahya Prayatnas. So Prag and Urdhva Bhavitvam asti iti Paninyadi. All the shikshas, not just Panini. Paninyadi shikshasu spashtam. Ataha tatra, through what type of passage does the air come out of the mouth? So is the passage open or is the passage closed? If the passage is open, we say they are unvoiced consonants or vivara aghosha shwasa. This is one kind of bahya prayatnas. If the passage is closed, we say samvara nada ghosha. These words cannot be used separately. It has to be one group of samvara nada ghosha, other group of vivara shwasa ghosha. But understand the meaning of each point. I think all of you already know it, but still. Open passage means what? So throat cavity is expanded. There are two vocal cords, therefore plural. Two vocal cords, so they are separated. Understand this mechanism clearly. They are separated. So vocal cords are away from each other. There is a hole. This is called as vivara. So vivara, presence of a hole over there. Now, because there is an open hole, the air can easily pass through just straight. So air does not collide with the vocal cords. It's like an open door. People can pass through the door without colliding with the door. So air does not collide with the vocal cords, and therefore vocal cords just remain quiet. They do not vibrate. So that is aghosha. Now, because there is no vibration, there is no alteration in the air or sound quality. So air comes simply as a forced breath, that is shwasa. All these three are related. As soon as the vocal cord is expanded, the air can freely pass out and then there is no vibration. So vivara, aghosha and shwasa. This is for the khar letters. You can see this. Try pronouncing sh, put hand like this over here and try pronouncing sh. Once I explain the other one, it will be very clear to you. The second category is Samvaranada Ghosha, where the throat cavity is contracted. The vocal cords are closed. So that is called Samvara. Because the vocal cords are closed, air cannot easily pass out. So air collides with the vocal cords. the vibration of vocal cords can be felt by the hands. So pronounce y versus sh. Actually try pronouncing it, sh and y. You can see that when y is pronounced, there is a vibration felt even by your hands. Put it over here, not over here. Put it over here, just below the kantha. So y versus sh. You can clearly see the difference between the pressure on your fingers. Here, there is a significant amount of pressure on your fingers. Why? Because vocal cords are closed, they are being pushed by the air that comes out. So there is a vibration generated. For sure, the vocal cords are not closed, there is a very little or negligible pressure. So r or w, you can feel the pressure on the fingers. Sh, s, you will always feel the touch. The question is whether you feel the pressure or not. It is very easy to see that when you pronounce ya, there is a clear pressure on the sides of the fingers. No such pressure is seen on the sh. Atahatra, vocal cords are in the passage of the air collides, the vibration happens. This is called ghosha. The vibrating sound comes out, that is called nada. So samvara ghosha nada are for the voice. So this is called voiced consonants, the anthastas, the varga panchamas, even k and g. K, g. Very perfectly seen. K versus g. You can see the difference. Sudhaji.
No, another way is if you close your ears, you can
Ha.
hear the nada at the
You
solar
can hear.
plexus.
Correct.
You can hear
Correct.
the
Correct.
nada.
Correct. 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 Absolutely. Very true. So then Nagesh defines this, all these terms. He only defines the terms vivara and samvara, but others follow. So vivara samvaro kantha bilasya vikasa sankochau. The gap between the vocal cord expanded versus contracted. So vivrutaha kantha yai shwasa anupradiyate yaihi and so on. So in the Vyakhya, what we have in the Mula is Bahya Pratnaha Ekadashadha, Vivara Samvara Shwasa Nada Ghosha Aghosha Alpa Prana Mahaprana Udatta Anudatta Swarita and so on. Udatta Anudatta Swarita we have seen. Alpa Prana Mahaprana is on the next slide. Alpa Prana and Mahaprana tells us how much air comes out. Again, relative scale. Less air comes out is Alpa Prana, Alpaha Prana. Mahaprana is more air comes out. So that is Alpa Prana versus Mahaprana. And then for Swaras, I have already shown the Bhashya, Ayamaha, Darunyam, Anuta. We discussed all these points in details in one of the previous classes. So Uchchairudattaha, Nichairunudattaha, Samahara Swaritaha, depending on the Gatranam Nigrahaha or hardness or softness of the sound or closeness or openness of the organs and so on. These three different groups have been created. So that is exactly what is written over here. बाह्य प्रयत्न एकादशधा विवार संवार श्वास नाद घोष अघोष अल्प प्राण महाप्राण उदात्त अनुदात्त स्वरित खरः विवाराः श्वासाः अघोषाः हषः. So कर्कश व्यंजनस versus मृदु व्यंजनस. हषः संवारा नादाः घोषाः. वर्गाणां प्रथम तृतीय पंचमः यणः अल्प प्राणाः. वर्गाणां द्वितीय चतुर्थौ शलः महाप्राणाः. कादयो मावसानाः स्पर्शाः. Mavasanaha is ka adayaha ma avasana. Avasana is end. So starting from ka up to ma. Kadayaha ma avasanaha. Kadayaha mavasanaha sparshaha. Yanaha antasthaha. Shalaha ushmanaha. Ach swaraha. So ushma ushmanau ushmanaha. Ushman iti pratipadikam. Ushma ushmanau ushmanaha. Shalaha ushmanaha. Achaha swaraha. Kha iti jivha mulya. Pa iti upadhmaniyah aha iti achaha paro anuswara visargo. Everybody knows all these things. Let's look at the vyakhyana. So bahya iti varnotpatti anantara jataha yatnaha bahya prayatna iti uchyate. So varna or the sound is pronounced generated from the uraha, from the chest, and then this air gets vibrated. So varnotpatti anantara doesn't mean after the varna is pronounced, because if bahya pratna is not there, varna cannot be pronounced. So there is a self contradiction over here. So varnotpatti means air. After the air is generated, the bahya pratna is there. So varnotpatti anantara jataha yatnaha bahya pratna iti uchyate. He explains what are the kharas, vivaras, hashas, samvaradi prayatnavantaha, alpa pranaha, ka, ga, nga, and so on. So these are alpa prana. Kha, gha, cha, jha, these are mahaprana. Kadaya iti ka, kha ityadi ma paryantam iti varnaha sparshaha. क आदिः येषां ते कादयः, म अवसाने इत्युक्ते अन्ते येषां ते मावसानाः, यण इति यण प्रत्याहारान्तर्गतवर्णाः यरलवाः, शल शल प्रत्याहारान्तर्गतवर्णाः ऊष्माणः and so on. स्वराः स्वेन राजते, they do not need the help of a vyanjana, so स्वेन राजते इति स्वराः अ इ उ रु and so on इति वर्णाः इत्यर्थः. I think all this is very well known to you all. I mean, there's nothing new. Just look at the quality or the style in which the commentary is written. This is a kind of language we should be also, planning to starting to write. That's it.
महोदय एकः प्रश्नः अस्ति, यदि विवारः अघोषः श्वासः, they are all related and they kind of the same group, then can we just say that is one bahya prayatna? Why are they classified as 6 different instead of 2 groups?
So prayatna is basically an effort, and effort is on different organs. So vivara is an effort on the vocal cords. Aghosha is the effort, a combined effort on the vocal cords and the air, and shwasa is directly an effort on the air. So these are the different places where the effort is being done. So they are being classified as separate. In linguistics, all of these are just classified under one name called unvoiced, whereas all others are classified under one name called voiced. So the linguists don't classify into these separate categories. In Shiksha Shastra, the efforts are concentrated on which place the effort is made. So when you clap, there is an effort on this hand and there is an effort on this hand. You have a different names for that and say both of them go together.
But how is that ach is not coming under any of this vivara, ghosha or nada like that?
Because ach is it comes under udatta anudatta swarita. Now if you see this, udatta anudatta swarita is very similarly defined. So in udatta anudatta swarita, it is again gatranam nigraha, which is basically whether the vocal cords are closed or are swarasya darunata, whether the sound vibrates or not, kanthadinam samrutata, how open is the kantha. So it's exactly the same mechanism in which udatta anudatta swarita is also defined, but they have gone into even further details, and they said that whatever positioning or structure is there for samvaranada ghosha or vivara shwasa ghosha is slightly different than that of udatta anudatta swarita. So then they made further categories, but on the top level they are exactly talking about the same thing. You see on the screen, right? Closed versus open organ is what? Anuta kanthadinam samvrutata. On the previous screen we exactly see the same, use the same words, vivara versus samvara, whole is created versus whole is not created. So udatta anudatta swarita are exactly mapped in the same logic, but they have further finer differences, therefore a separate name has been given to them.
The minor differences on the closeness or the harshness.
Correct, on the correctness or on the vibrations and so on. Correct. Another point over there is that in case of the voiced, unvoiced and all that, is the letters that are classified. So ka is in one category and ga is in another category. Whereas when it comes to swaraj, same a is udatta and anudatta and swarita depending on the style of pronunciations. Same a is udatta, anudatta and swarita depending on the style of pronunciation. So it definitely is it deserves to have it's a separate category. That's why they are given separately. Otherwise, one would have very easily created the same categories and put them on those things. Alpa prana, mahaprana is different. Alpa prana is basically the amount of air. So that has nothing to do with any of these. So alpa prana and mahaprana, you can have combinations of each of them. So you have savaranada ghosha alpa prana, savaranada ghosha mahaprana. Vivara shwasa ghosha alpa prana, vivara shwasa ghosha mahaprana. So amount of air is a orthogonal, perpendicular axis. But udatta anudatta swarita is exactly in the same mechanism as samvarana, the ghosha. You can see this over. He doesn't use those words, but he uses different words, but exactly the same thing. Gatrana nigraha means what? How loose the vocal cords are being kept. Swarasya darunata, whether the sound comes harsh or whether it vibrates, something like that.
And the swaras also have to be alpa prana like that, right? Like
Swaras,
that is
they don't
also
classify it into alpa prana and mahaprana. If there is alpa prana, it makes sense to have a mahaprana. If there is mahaprana, it makes sense to have alpa prana. If there is only one type of air or one specific amount of air that comes out, then you don't need to classify it into more or less. Maybe that is the reason why the swaras are not classified into alpa prana versus mahaprana.
ह्रस्वः दीर्घः अत्रैव भेदः अस्ति।
Rasva dirgha pluta iti ucharana kala sadrisha kalasya bhedaha. That's completely different. see, there is a third axis actually. So Gatranam Vishaye is one thing, how much air comes out is the second thing, and for how long the air comes out. Is it 1 unit of time, 2 unit of time, 3 unit of time? So that is Rasva Dirgha Pluta. That is a completely different axis. Now Rasva Dirgha Pluta can also be considered for Shakara. I have told you in the previous class. Without A, you can pronounce Sh for a lot of time. Right? So you can say this is a Dirgha Sh or Pluta Sh. They just don't need it in the language, so they do it. They don't do it. It's that simple as that.
Mahodaya, when we already have the Udatta, Anudatta, Swarita, Prabheda in that Ashtadasha Prabheda, the same thing again being repeated in the Bahya Prayatna, what is the use of that, Mahodaya?
First of all, Bahya Prayatnas are not written by Panini. It is being discussed in Siddhanta Kaumudi or Laghu Siddhanta Kaumudi. So he is just enumerating the Bahya Prayatnas that we have already learned from Uchcherudatta, Nicherunadatta. So he is saying that all the Samvara, Nada Ghosha, Vivara, Shvasa Ghosha, Alpa Prana, Mahaprana are for Vyanjanas. Then what are the Bahya Prayatnas for Swaras? Well, we have already studied them. Uchcherudatta, Nicherunadatta, Samahara, Swarita. He is enumerating. Bahya Prayatna is basically the efforts required for vibration of chord and so on, which is Udatta Anudatta Swarita.